Okay, thank you, and good afternoon. We are here this afternoon for our regular scheduled meeting of the Accountability and Implementation Board. We have a rather full agenda for today. Let me first of all acknowledge and thank all the hard work from our staff, especially those we've worked with throughout the systems, local agencies over the last several months. It goes without saying that this is an awful lot of work. We recognize that, and we recognize and accept the responsibility and the sacrifices that people are making throughout the entire state. It is not easy. This is the first time that we are fully implementing this process as it relates to a waiver later on today. And so we want to make sure that we get that right and that we are as responsible and responsive to all of the concerns as best as possible. The blueprint is not a one-size-all proposition. We've tried to be as flexible as possible to make adjustments, especially adjustments that are founded with sufficient evidence to make adjustments. And where we found that to be the case, we have in fact made adjustments over the years. But it's not something that we take lightly. And therefore, when we consider adjustments and changes, especially those in our authority, we are very apt to make certain that we get that and get it right. There are some things State Board of Education required legislation, and when we believe that that is appropriate, seek to have those as well. So thank everyone for being here this afternoon. Our first item today, I think, Madam Executive Director, is to make sure that we have a quorum, that you call the roll and see who's here.
Yes, sir. In addition to the chair, we have Vice Chair Kerwin and members Stapleton, Doss, Lynch, and Robinson. Member Manco is out of the country.
Okay.
So we have a quorum.
Right. I think we now need to approve our last meeting summary. Everyone has an opportunity to look at that and to take an opportunity to see if there's any changes or deletions or comments like to make on that. Now's the time to do so. Hearing or seeing none, we will now entertain a motion to approve the minutes, the summary of the last meeting.
I so move.
I second.
Been moved and properly second that we approve. Any unreadiness? None. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Thank you. Opposition? Hearing none, is so approved. I think the next item for us, Madam Executive Director, is the public comments, if I recall. And so at this point in time, is there anyone in the waiting room providing public comments at this point in time?
Yes, we do have one person who signed up to make public comment. It's Julie Walsh, and I see her. She has joined. There we go. Go. Thank you for being here.
Walsh, thank you.
You're on mute. You're on mute.
Thank you. Hello, thank you for the opportunity to speak before you today. My name is Julie Walsh. I am a mother of 5 children attending Carroll County Public Schools, and I come to you on behalf of the Carroll Education Coalition, a newly formed nonpartisan group of Carroll County residents advocating for adequate funding and staffing for our schools. We have submitted written comments that outline our coalition's advocacy efforts, but I just want to emphasize that we recognize that both the state and county governments bear responsibility for adequately providing for our schools. And so we have been focusing our efforts not just toward the state, but also toward our county. We have and we will continue to advocate for a greater local contribution to our school system. I am here today to voice our coalition's support for CCPS's waiver application and to ask for your approval. I have been a parent and volunteer in CCPS for 10 years now, and I have found my children's schools to be warm, engaging, and genuinely concerned for the success and well-being of all their students. What I have not found is for the schools to be bloated. Indeed, I have found CCPS to be exceptionally lean. As I have come to understand the goals of the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, I have found much to admire. But I have also come to understand an implementation framework that assumes that school districts have centralized resources that can be better distributed. I don't doubt that in many jurisdictions that's true. But in Carroll, where we have already concentrated our resources at the school level, implementation feels almost impossibly tricky. From what we have seen, CCPS has been working earnestly in a challenging environment to develop its blueprint implementation plan. But at this point, CCPS does not seem able to implement Blueprint without creating a situation where some of our schools and students, including some of our students in most need, will suffer from a meaningful lack of resources. The Coalition believes that the objectives of the Blueprint are admirable, but it has concerns about the dramatic staffing reductions and redistributions that are contained in CCPS's current implementation plan. When children in some schools will lose access to reading and math specialists, when they will be crammed into classrooms of more than 40 students, when high schoolers will lose access to courses meant to prepare them for their futures, then it will not feel like the goals of Blueprint have been respected. It will feel like a failure. We hope that with more time, more attention, more information, and more funding, CCPS could devise an implementation plan that better serves our students, teachers, and schools. We ask you to grant Carroll's waiver so that CCPS will be able to complete an implementation plan that works for its unique situation and aligns with the goals of Blueprint. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Welch. Any comments? Okay. Any additional public comments, Ms. Executive Director?
No, that was all. Thank you so much, Ms. Walsh.
Mhm.
We'll now go to the Carroll County's Public Schools waiver oral arguments. Let me thank the entire Carroll County community. We received, I think, in excess of over 1,200 emails from parents and administrators and others that demonstrates a very strong public interest in the school system, and I want to compliment you on the civic involvement as it relates to that. As you know, we have a very heavy responsibility to weigh such a request with all of the considerations of things that we ultimately want to achieve. And so we do not take this lightly. So the way this process will go today, we'll hear from the Carroll County Public Schools, the superintendent and her staff. They have been allotted 20 minutes for oral arguments. That may be followed, it will be followed by questions and comments to the superintendent and others. The process today will allow us an opportunity to delve a little bit more deeply into this request. We've also received a written petition, if you will, from Carroll County, for which our staff and others have had an opportunity to review. And I think there were a few follow-up questions that followed from the original presentation. We will keep the record open until the close of business on Monday, which is the 21st, as I recall. That will be followed by a public discussion and a vote at a time for a decision before no later than May the 1st of this year. I repeat that. The public record will remain open until the close of business the 21st of this month. We'll have a decision and an open process for a decision by May the 1st of this year. So we're talking just a couple of weeks before this entire decision process presumably is open. Now, that's the outline of the general plan. There may be questions or comments or additional information that could alter that, but that is what we have at least tentatively agreed to do and follow. So again, let me thank the superintendent and the entire staff. Let me acknowledge the number of letters that we've received and all of the comments from the entire Carroll County community. I want to commend you again for keeping us informed about the seriousness of this and the challenges that you see ahead. So, Madam Superintendent, Ms. McCabe, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for this time. I just want to thank the AIB members for this opportunity to present, Executive Director Heiss and the AIB staff for helping to organize this argument. I am Cindy McCabe, the Superintendent of Schools for Carroll County, and joining me today are my two Assistant Superintendents, John O'Neill for Operations and Nick Shockney for Instruction. They are here for support and to help respond to any questions you may have. We will spend some time on the detail, but I do want to state up front that we consider our waiver to be a request for time under the schedule the AIB created in Joint Implementation Policy Number 2, Minimum School Funding Requirement. We are not seeking exemption from the requirements of Blueprint, but rather more time to achieve them. First, I'd like to provide an initial reference to what we've submitted, as we may reference different documents as we go through this discussion. We initially submitted our waiver request on April 1st. That initial submission is 37 pages under cover letter from me to Chair Leggett and includes 6 appendices A through F. The night before we submitted, the AIB staff released a template for the waiver process. After our initial submission, we also submitted the template on Friday, April 11th. This second set of documents includes the Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, which includes the template tabs, including our individual tabs for all of our individual schools. It also includes separate attachments for our responses to the justification for waiver and the public engagement sections of the template with supporting documentation. As I mentioned, we will refer to the different documents, including these, in the 2 packets. When we do, I will clarify which packet I'm referring to so that you may each view a particular document. We will also use the slide deck to bring your attention and anyone who may be viewing the meeting to some references, particularly of the data charts. Another topic I want to address preliminarily, because I believe it is important for all in this context, is our work on the Blueprint as a whole in Carroll County Public Schools, which I'm very proud of. The main takeaway I want to impart is that in CCPS, we are hard at work implementing the Blueprint with fidelity, and we have made tremendous progress in so many ways. We may sometimes have concerns with pace or with process, but in general, we support the main components of Blueprint. We do not dispute Blueprint's aim of wanting to provide the most resources possible for our students based on their needs. We want this too. Our initial successes with Blueprint implementations have crossed all pillars. In pre-K expansion, we have expanded full-time pre-K classrooms in our schools where space permits. In addition, we have a multi-million-dollar facilities master plan and CIP program with our county commissioners to phase in additional pre-K classrooms in schools that require additional space. Our CCR efforts have been growing. We believe we have a cohesive working relationship with our local Workforce Development Board and that our partnership under our local MOU is one of the most effective in the state. Likewise, our local partnership on dual enrollment predated Blueprint by many years. Our MOU is now updated to reflect AIB Joint Policy Number 1, dual enrollment. Our Career and Technology Center is a highlight of our system, and we have developed our AP Diploma program as well. Much of our most outstanding Blueprint success, you may even say astounding, has been in Pillar 2. We have made tremendous progress toward career ladder implementation and believe there is room for further growth even as part of this process of fiscal compliance if our waiver is granted. Much of this focus and our success in Pillar 2 was born of necessity. We emerged from the pandemic in a dire staffing situation, including classroom teacher positions. Teacher attrition increased. We struggled to find certified candidates for all of our roles. Our percentage of conditionally certified teachers tripled, and we finished the 2023-24 school year with 26 teacher positions unfilled. This unprecedented collaboration resulted in us being one of the first systems in Maryland to submit a career ladder framework for approval predicated upon achieving the $60,000 minimum teacher salary effective with fiscal year 2025. This last goal was achieved only through additional funding support from our county commissioners. The new career ladder salary scale was effective this past July, and the impact on stabilizing our workforce was immediate. As our teacher demographic shifted during the pandemic, a more comprehensive teacher induction program emerged as another urgent need. A new teacher induction program with requisite mentoring is also a component of the Blueprint Career Ladder. Given this connection, we sought to address our need for new teacher induction mentoring through a Blueprint-specific partnership. We reached out to Dr. Nancy Grasmick at Towson University to establish a partnership between CCPS and Towson University with support from the AIB. Towson University will provide mentors for our new teachers beginning in August. Through our strategic facilitator provided by the AIB, we have developed a comprehensive content framework for both new teachers and mentors for this program. One focus of that content is to support the learning of at-promise students. We are excited with this new Blueprint partnership and the bridge it will serve to our full implementation of Career Ladder, but also because our new teachers have this need now. One final bit of background information I want to address to provide fuller context for our waiver request is the budgetary history of the school system in the period entering Blueprint. The decade from FY09 through FY19, just prior to the pandemic, saw a sustained decline in our enrollment for CCPS, resulting in a cumulative loss of over $16 million in state education aid. While our county attempted to fund us, they could not overcome the loss in state aid, increases due to inflation, and the need for improvements, such as employee compensation. You can find that funding history in Appendix A of our original submission or on the screen. The net effect of that decade is that the Board of Education was forced to eliminate many programs, 375 FTE positions, and close 3 schools. You can see on the screen the positions that were eliminated and the programs that were cut. Generally, we eliminated a disproportionate percentage of administrative and supervisory positions and school-based supports. Teacher FTE were eliminated requisite with the declining enrollment levels. Rather than highlight only what was eliminated, I thought it may be more telling to provide some examples of what remains. For a school system of 40 schools, 2,200 teachers, and 26,000 students, we are left with 2 system staff developers, 3 system-wide teacher mentors, 1 research and accountability system position, and no central teaching curriculum specialists. The net effect of these reductions is that we begin the process of resource reallocation as required by Blueprint. We have drastically fewer resources to reallocate proportionate to other systems. The chart in Appendix B in our April 1st submission, which is now on the screen, uses MSDE data to compare LEA staffing on a per pupil basis. We are last in the state for A&S staff, including central office, and next to last for instructional support resources. This impacts our plan for reallocation in a way that has energized our community. Now, with this context in mind, let's move into our specific waiver request. As I stated when I opened, our request is for a waiver of the timeline established by the AIB in Joint Implementation Policy 2, to comply with school level funding requirements for compensatory education and multi-language learners, or ML. It is not a waiver of the Blueprint minimum funding requirements, nor is there an unwillingness to address those requirements. As explained and provided in our April 1st submission, following the adoption of Joint Policy Number 2, my response as a superintendent was to form a countywide work group to develop a comprehensive system plan for fiscal compliance. I required that the work group conclude by January with a comprehensive report so that it could align with the FY26 budget process. So it's not a refusal, but rather the community response to that compliance plan that brings us here to this waiver process. In light of the context I just outlined, our plan for compliance requires seismic shifts in how schools will be resourced. In the plan, which largely addresses compensatory education fiscal compliance, our schools with the lowest percentage of compensatory education students will experience dramatic increases to class sizes and reduced course offerings with the elimination of instructional support resources for teachers and students, such as teacher specialists and mental health support positions. The negative community response appears to be universal across all stakeholder groups. It led to an outcry throughout Carroll County for a more reasonable approach, which made its way to Annapolis during this legislative session. So in many ways, this is about the process of change management, and it is about the decision to choose between implementing Blueprint at all costs, even if it alienates an entire school community, and therefore eroding all confidence in the entire Blueprint, or pausing for a more measured approach that might quiet the overwhelming resistance, allow us to build an approach that may grow community understanding and perhaps garner more support. So we're asking for the time to rethink the teacher and school level reallocation of resources, which caused the outcry and which creates the greatest imbalances among schools, and which we have paused pending this waiver. Allow us to work with the APA's consultants to validate our data, review our plan, and hopefully offer revised or additional strategies for achieving fiscal compliance and coding program expenditures. And finally, return to the teacher and school level changes in a manner informed by this work and on a pace that can be accepted by most in our school community. Now I'd like to go over the grounds for our waiver. The AIB template asks us to choose a ground for a waiver request for each school, which is the drop-down list for one selection. Therefore, in general, we selected other. However, in the area of compensatory education, we also want to make the case that the grounds of a significant shift in school level enrollment of at-promise students between the prior year and the current year applies in our situation. The reason we selected other builds on my remarks a moment ago. We are not requesting an exception under the Blueprint statute, but rather more time than you provided through your policy. Our goal is to achieve compliance in a manner and on a timeline that supports all learners in our schools and can build greater confidence among the school system community. A large part of this request is to allow time for us to work with the AIB's consultants from APA Consulting to refine our plan, explore additional strategies, and consider additional methodologies for coding expenditures to specific Blueprint programs. The AIB has already provided a contract with APA, and the work is already underway. While still in the initial stages, we have provided data to APA and have had one preliminary discussion on steps in the process. Even at this early stage, we are encouraged by the discussion, and in particular, some of the next steps proposed. We are very interested in APA's assessment of the resources required in a base school, as that has tremendous impact on the compensatory education aspect of our compliance plan. We also are very interested in any additional or refined compliance strategies that they have to share, which may have potential to provide some relief to our Tier 1 and Tier 2 schools. In particular, we are excited to explore opportunities for further implementation of the career ladder in our Tier 4 schools based on the level of resources being reallocated. We did not have sufficient time to finish our career ladder modeling before shifting our focus to the fiscal compliance work group. This waiver would allow us the opportunity to complete that work and incorporate the outcomes into the resource allocation process. Another key area of work we are anticipating with APA is in the methodology of coding expenditures to the Blueprint program. This involves developing practical specificity to the general guidance in the Blueprint for Maryland's future fiscal reporting guidelines, otherwise known as the Baby Blue Book. In particular, through the process of refining expenditure coding, we believe significant progress will be made toward compliance in ML. Through coding existing resources to the school level, which are presently charged centrally, and through coding dual certified teachers in multiple programs, we believe sizable progress will be made in ML. We may even have specific schools that are compliant with Joint Policy Number 2 in the next fiscal year. As mentioned a moment ago, in the case of compensatory education compliance, we also believe the statutory ground of a significant shift in school-level enrollment of at-promise students between the prior year and the current year applies for us. In FY23, we were beginning to plan for fiscal compliance with one scope in mind. While we knew that compensatory education would present our largest compliance gap, that scope dramatically shifted beyond any comprehension with the changes made by the state to direct certification. The state saw a 33.6% increase in compensatory education enrollment, resulting in an unanticipated new funding requirement of $309.9 million. This resulted in tremendous concern in the state and in the General Assembly about the unanticipated compensatory education population growth and the impact it would have on Blueprint funding. Local school systems were questioned on the validity of the data, even though those data came to us from the state. There was even talk that the 2023 enrollments were an anomaly that would correct in the subsequent year, a prediction from the state that did not come true. Even though the outcry at the state level was elevated, the state as a whole experienced nothing like what occurred locally in Carroll County. Our compensatory education enrollment jumped by 86.3% for FY24, thereby outpacing the state's unanticipated growth by almost triple. While the bar for the state moved at a level that caused alarm, it moved almost 3 times that amount for us, totally recalibrating our compliance efforts. Moreover, the greatest growth we saw was not in our schools with the highest compensatory education percentages. In our compliance plans, we divided our schools into 4 tiers based on percentage of compensatory education enrollment, with Tier 1 being the lowest and Tier 4 being the highest. As the chart in our justification section and on the screen illustrates, we have seen the most significant growth in compensatory education enrollment by far in our Tier 1 schools. This is concerning to us because under our plan, in order to meet minimum school funding levels in compensatory education, we are required to reduce classroom teachers from Tier 1 schools, dramatically increasing class sizes there, while at the same time stripping all of the instructional support resources. However, we know that the compensatory education enrollments are growing in these schools at more than double the rate of our Tier 4 schools. We are concerned of the impact these changes will have on all learners, including the at-promise learners. We do not believe the Blueprint envisioned this type of scenario for at-promise learners in some of our schools. Despite this dramatic shift in our compensatory education enrollment, we have made progress in compensatory education. We treated new compensatory education funding from FY24 to FY26 as if it were restricted and applied that funding, which was over $11 million, to our 16 schools with the highest concentrations of compensatory education. Additionally, we have an additional $2.8 million in centrally held compensatory education funding that we are planning to send to the school level pending the outcome of this waiver request. Finally, a few comments on public engagement relative to our waiver request. Truly, our entire school system community has been focused on the issue of blueprint fiscal compliance since our plan was first released on January the 8th. The response to our plan for resource reallocation was immediate and pronounced. We held public presentations specific to the plan on January 8th, February 12th, and March 12th at our Board of Education business meetings. On March 6th, we presented the fiscal compliance plan at a public meeting of the Board of County Commissioners. In addition, 3 specific town hall meetings were held with the sole focus on the Blueprint Fiscal Compliance Plan. The employee town hall was on March 4th, and we had 2 community town halls, one on March 5th and one on April 2nd. All were very well attended, and the videos of those town halls have been streamed over 2,000 times. Although only the April 2nd town hall was held after our formal waiver request was submitted, the theme of all the sessions was the community speaking against the amount of immediate school level change and an outcry for a slower pace. As the timing was coincidental to the 90-day General Assembly, much outreach was focused on state leaders. Also, the AIB was discussing the waiver policy in that same time period of February through March. We are aware that the AIB received hundreds of emails at that time during that time period. And while they may have arrived prior to April 1st, they all share the same theme. In essence, our April 1st waiver submission was written in concert with our school system community. Some main stakeholders were consulted in the preparation of the waiver request. In our April 1st packet, you will find letters endorsing our waiver from the entire Carroll County delegation, the Board of County Commissioners, and the 2 certified unions, CCEA and APSASCO, whose memberships are most impacted by the staffing reallocations in our compliance plan. Since we filed our waiver request on April 1st, pursuant to the AIB's waiver policy, we have indicated that if community members wish to endorse the waiver, then they should contact the AIB. This was shared via community email, social media, and in public at the April 2nd Community Town Hall and April 9th at the Board of Education meeting. As part of the attachments submitted with the AIB waiver template, we have included our messaging to the community. So in essence, that wraps up our testimony. Again, I want to thank everyone here for the opportunity to provide oral argument, and we would love the opportunity to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. I will now entertain any questions or comment from board members.
Mr. Chair, 2
Yes.
members have Vice Chair Kerwin and Member Lynch.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Vice Chair?
Okay, thank you. Well, first, let me thank you, Superintendent McCabe, for your very thoughtful and complete presentation. I know a lot of work went into making it possible, and we do appreciate the time and thought you've given to this. I'm curious about one of the spreadsheets that you provided, and it has to do with the projected compensatory education expenditures in fiscal 25, and it also shows those expenditures in fiscal 26. And what is curious to me is that despite the growth you're talking about in compensatory education, students eligible for those resources, it appears from that chart that you're spending more money. You are projecting a greater expenditure in 25 than 26. According to this chart, you have in 25, 12,874,000 plus in 25, but only 12,550,000 plus in 26. I don't understand how that could be given the enrollment growth for compensatory education eligible students.
Thank you for that question. I'll have Mr. O'Neill answer that question.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. McCabe and Dr. Kerwin, and good afternoon to everyone. That's a great question, Dr. Kerwin, and you are correct. The growth of the population has grown, and therefore the shares under Blueprint will have grown as well. I think a couple of things are helpful to understand as to what's showing there right now. What is showing there right now is money allocated to the school level in terms of full-time equivalent positions, or FTE. What's reserved is roughly $3 million not being shown yet at the school level, pending both the real-time outcome of our FY26 operating budget, which is a process still ongoing. So we haven't yet seen final analysis from MSDE on the state's budget, and we certainly are not through our local budget process, which will conclude in late May. And also, honestly, we sort of paused some things pending this waiver outcome, which is a statement Dr. McCabe made a bit ago, to sort of see if we need to move our approach in a different direction. So as Dr. McCabe said, we began this work before the AIB adopted Joint Policy 2, and then had to sort of readjust to both the tremendous growth in enrollment and then the direction in the policy. And I guess I would try to say it like this. The initial approach we've taken was one where we believed we were going to spend those resources at the schools who have the highest percentage of comp ed students, compensatory ed students right now. And that in so doing, we believe mathematically in a different way than the spreadsheet captures, we're providing the greatest educational benefit to the most compensatory ed students possible. Joint policy number 2 prescribes kind of a 2-year process to sort of get maybe broader than that across the system. And if an outcome of this is to shift that focus, then that $3 million in resources at the moment, we're kind of trying to decide what to do. It might either go to those 16 schools where we started the work already, if we have the time to move forward from where we are on the path we've been on, or we might need to reallocate those funds and others to sort of, I guess I'll just say it this way, make some of those zeros on the spreadsheet not be zeros in different schools. It's a difference in approach between how the policy turned out to be written versus the initial approach we took. We could have done many different things. We could have taken the money and started on the other end. And if I filled that money in beginning with our smallest comp ed schools, on paper, I would be way more compliant with way more schools, but we'd be touching less compensatory education students who go to school in Carroll County. It's now a matter of determining if that approach continues or if we take a different approach as to where we deploy those remaining resources.
So just to help me understand, I think I heard you say that there's another $3 million roughly that you intend to spend in 26 on compensatory education?
Yes, sir. I have, and I'm sort of looking really quickly, but I have 12.55 million more or less showing on
Right,
the
right.
spreadsheet total, and the full total, meaning the little bit not yet deployed, should total around 15.4 million.
Okay.
Does that help?
That's helpful. I appreciate that. On another chart, in maybe there's a similar explanation, I don't know. It shows no allocation for English language learners.
That's true. This is showing expenditures at the school level. We have more than $2 million in actual ML expenditures in Carroll County Public Schools. Traditionally, they've been coded at central office. Now that there are ESOL teachers or ESOL certified teachers, so obviously they don't teach anyone at central office, but they've been deployed out of central office. Dr. Kerwin, I would try to say, like, in a model somewhat similar to how you would deploy resources for special education, based on service hour needs. And so we have maintained a staff of ESOL teachers who are apportioned out to students in schools throughout the year as the service hours would require. We need to now code them differently. We need to code the expenditures of those staff to the school level to show compliance in the spreadsheet with Blueprint. And that seems like a simple thing to say, but it requires some work on the back end in terms of our budget office to work through the process of how do you take a single human being and code them as an expenditure to, let's say, 5 schools or 6 schools. That's one of the key topics we've taken up with Justin and Michaela from APA and Anna as they've joined us in recent weeks. So to answer your question, just the shift of those coding those expenditures differently to the school level should show that compliance gap closing by about half automatically, just by that alone.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions, Ms. Executive Director?
Yes. Member Lynch and then Member Doss.
Thank you very much. I actually have 2 different questions. First of all, thank you so much for your presentation and for all of the work. I know you've been submitting documents to our staff, so I really do appreciate all of the work that's gone into that. I was wondering if you could share a little bit about the history of your community engagement beginning in 2021 when the bill was passed and indicated that these shifts would need to happen, and your engagement beginning with technical assistance that is now we've been offering for 2 years. And so I'm interested sort of what the community conversations and what the system level shifts were beginning in 2021 until this point, understanding you've had some more recent changes that have caused different thinking, but sort of what was that process up to then? And sort of what has your engagement been, not only just in this year with our technical assistance, but within previous years? And then I'll have a second question.
So starting in 2022, I began holding town hall meetings for our community and for our employees to help them understand what Blueprint was, what its goals were, and what it meant for us as far as the fiscal compliance piece, so that this would not be a surprise for anyone now when we're making those changes. So in each of the last 3 years, I've held 3 town hall meetings. We've discussed it in open session at our board's business meetings, and we've sent out communications to our community. We also took advantage of the assistance from APA by having a facilitator that we've been working with since they were made available, and that has been of great value to us. Just having someone else look at what we're doing from an outside perspective has, I think, been very effective. And he has also helped us tremendously with our issue of teacher induction, teacher mentoring, because without having a professional development department with resources that we can send out to schools to help teachers, it's very difficult for us to make the gains in academic achievement, especially for our at-promise students. And then, Mr. O'Neill, is there anything I have forgotten in our technical assistance?
I don't think so. We'll respond to follow-up questions.
Okay.
Thank you. And then the second thing I just want to kind of discuss is that we did receive a lot of emails. And there were some general themes that as a former school principal and as a parent certainly stood out to me. And some of them included that we had families who were saying things like, my child will not get their 504 or their special education services. We won't have access to art. The class sizes will be larger than 40. And so when I look at your documents, I think there's a couple things that I just have questions about because it seems like maybe there's some miscommunication happening in communities and maybe this is an opportunity for you to make those a little bit more clear. Because the blueprint has a foundational funding that is for every single student. And that is based on, a formula that is set to provide for resourcing, staffing, computers, all of the things that we've been hearing from. And that rate was not at a 1/40 student teacher ratio. It was much lower than that. On top of that, there's additional funding sort of buckets for compensatory education for our students of low income, special education, multilingual learners. And so those are the additional funds that are meant to flow to schools to help them provide additional layers of support that will help close achievement gaps and have everybody succeed, those at-promise students that you're talking about. And so there seems to be a perception that sort of a foundational level of support is being misdirected from one school to another, when I'm not sure that that's what was ever intended to be communicated. And so I'm wondering if you can just provide a little bit of information around that. And the second component I'm hearing is that those resources are maybe being directed to those schools, but you're having a coding, like they're not being coded that way. Because I think the other component is the question of if it doesn't look like there's multilingual support funding going to these schools, is the support actually happening? Which for me as an AIB board member is what I want to make sure that the funding is flowing to the students as it's intended to flow for the purpose and support it's intended to flow for.
Sure. I'll begin and then I'll see if either of the assistant superintendents want to jump in. But what I'll say is that as you know, the blueprint is complex, it's complicated. And so as I've done town halls over the last 3 years, I have really tried my best to break things down into understandable issues for our parents and for our community. We have been clear with our community that students will still be getting their special education services, their 504s will still be implemented. What parents come back to me with is, but how will that happen when class sizes go to 40? And I understand that concern. But what I can make sure that our community understands is that nothing will be changing as far as making sure that we have the FTE necessary to meet IEPs as well as 504 plans. Mr. O'Neill, do you want to add?
I'll do my best. Dr. Lynch, I think a good question, maybe another way I could sort of state what's at play in our schools today is, it's not this simple, but I think maybe it'll work. If you look at our school level funding today, a conclusion you could draw through the lens of now blueprint versus pre-blueprint is that we spend more money in the total. So if you take off each lens of a special population, we spend more money than legally required in our schools. But through the lenses of blueprint, we overspend in the foundation, if you will, and underspend in comp ed and ML. We also overspend based on the shares of blueprint in special education. So there's that's sort of the reconciliation that has to take place now through resource allocation. And I think to the points you made in the form of your question, it's a little bit of all of those things. Some of that gap will be filled through expenditure coding, and especially in ML. I mean, that would be an area where there would be tremendous progress alone based on that. But in compensatory ed, it's going to be about resource allocation. So it's going to be about money that you could legitimately code at a school level today above the required amount of the foundation needs to be shifted so that it can qualify for compensatory ed as an expenditure. And we made a choice as a school system, rightly or wrongly, it's the choice that was made in the reality where we sit today, that during that decade of $40 million in budget cuts, Dr. McCabe referred to the history of funding based on enrollment. We stripped the central office of resources, which I think everyone would have felt was the right thing to do. And then at the school level, we tried to maintain a base level of instructional resources, support resources in the schools, but we emphasized class size, maintaining class size. We only cut teaching FTE commensurate with enrollment decline. Now, those reallocations of foundation coded things at school to other areas is basically mostly happening just at the school level. And in the schools that have a smaller percentage of compensatory education students, that change is felt greater through that process of reallocation than it is at the schools that have much higher percentages of compensatory education students. I know what I tried to say, but I don't know what you heard or if that answered anything of your
Well,
question.
I know, I think that's great. And I know this is very hard for you guys, and I really do appreciate you answering the questions. I think I would love a little bit more clarity around the class size in particular, because while we know that the blueprint doesn't speak to any particular class size, that foundational funding formula was based on different levels, but it was somewhere around 1 in 20, 25 students. And so that was sort of the way that a cost for teaching and resources and supports was determined, was sort of loosely based there. And we know that means that some class sizes are going to be much smaller based on need, some are going to be much larger based on need, based on grade level, that kind of thing. When I look at your data that you've presented to us show that it was slightly under that before, and now it's at like 1 in 20, 1 in 26. So I guess there's sort of this sense in your community, at least in the way that they're emailing us, that all of these class sizes will be 1 in 40. I just don't see that in what you're presenting to me in the data. And so I'm not sure sort of where some of that miscommunication is coming from. And especially given that foundational funding is sort of set again to suggest that 1 in 40 would not be what the funding level would be set around.
I, to the same point Dr. McCabe answered earlier, or I guess she said in her remarks, this is somewhat a process of change management. And so you are correct. There is a tremendous amount of confusion and it varies. And we're working our best to try to close those gaps and work on clarifying things. That's part of, I think, the request for some time here. I don't want to embark upon a philosophical debate about the foundation.
Yeah, we got the understanding that there may be some miscommunication. We understand what you said, and sometimes in the process, it comes out the other way from the other side. So let's go on to the next question. Any other questions you have, Board Member Lynch?
No, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other?
Yes, Member Doss and then Member Stapleton.
Hello, thank you. Of course, I want to thank you all for your presentation and for also making it very clear that this is a waiver of the timeline. That was very important to me. But I just want to step out of this for 1 minute and just say a little personal note. I've done a lot of work in dual enrollment and college and career readiness in my own career. And I am familiar with Carroll County's work in the dual enrollment sector even before the blueprint. And you briefly mentioned that in your presentation. So I just want to commend you on that work because I know that you guys accomplished a lot even before we had the blueprint and so forth, and you continue to do so. So congratulations in that area. We've been talking a lot, and we were just talking about resources and coding shifts and so forth, and funding. But I just would like to kind of know, and maybe more simpler terms, everything should be all of this, whether it's the timeline, it's the resources, the shifting, everything should be, in my mind, about improvement. And so we're talking about multilingual learning. And with that, what are just the more overall plans to enhance multilingual learning instruction for Carroll County with all of this movement?
Well, one of the biggest changes that will occur is that we will be embarking on moving those resources from central office out to the schools and increasing the number of ESOL teachers we have. And so in the past, our ESOL or MLL staff was focused on supporting the teachers because we didn't have enough of them to really, provide more robust services directly to students. So much of their time went into, a teach or train the trainer model. And with us being able to put more teachers directly into the schools with the students, we will be shifting to a much more robust direct service model to students who need those services. Mr. Shockney or Mr. O'Neill, do you want to add to that?
Dr. McCabe, you said that very well. It's our intent to increase the number of ESOL teachers that we have, as well as provide additional opportunities for folks with more than one certification or now licensure on their certificate to work with our multilingual learners. So that might mean, for example, an ESOL teacher co-teaching with an ELA teacher who might also happen to have their ESOL licensure or certification as well. So those are opportunities that we're looking forward to expanding, which will make a much more robust instructional program, and will help us be able to provide more direct services to students.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Madam Executive Director?
Yes, Member Stapleton, and then Member Robinson, and then Vice Chair Kerwin.
Okay.
Thank you. Again, I want to thank you, and I also want to thank you all for being in the profession that you're in. It's a very important one. And I want to touch on actually Member Doss hit kind of part of my question, and it was a follow-up to something that Mr. O'Neill said in response to Vice Chair Kerwin, and that was about this. Right now in your waiver request, there were zeros down the board for multilingual learners per school. And you talked a lot about the coding process, and I totally understand that 2.1 million or something is currently being spent central, and you'll be moving that to the school. But that means that you're still short, and you mentioned, Mr. O'Neill, that just that would cut the problem in half, still short over $1 million. Will you be, like, for us to approve a waiver, we need to approve the idea that you are well on your way and can reach in some time period that goal. So can you quantify or sort of talk, you talk generally right now about kind of the types of things you're going to do, but is there more than $1 million worth of that activity that's going to happen at the schools? Or how long is that going to take to roll out?
Sure. In the plan we started with that has now led us here, that would have taken place over the next 2 years. And In the first year, all of that work would have happened, not just for ML, but for comp ed, compensatory ed as well, in the secondary schools, middle and high, and then in the third year at elementary schools. And it does involve the coding conversation we've had. There's also, our student population was essentially flat in the aggregate this fall, but our comp ed and our ML populations did increase. So overall, a static number more or less, but those areas grew. And so there's additional funding to be allocated next year beyond the 2 million budgeted centrally. It's approximately, board member, I believe it's approximately just over 300,000. So there's another step. And then the remainder is the reallocation of the funding of the foundation funded resources and shifting those allocations from foundation type resources into ML and compensatory ed resources. So it could take place on the pace in the plan, or it could take place on an extended pace pending this waiver to allow more time for all the things that Dr. McCabe spoke about in her remarks, sort of gaining some traction and some confidence and pacing it in a way to sort of manage this change process, and to also be very open to any kind of promising strategies or solutions APA will offer us as well over the next months.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Member Robinson?
Yes.
Yeah, Member Stapleton sort of asked what my question was. I guess I'm still trying to wrap my mind around the way that the multilingual learners data and funding allocations have been represented. So what you just shared kind of helped me understand a little bit more about that. And if there's any space that you want to elaborate on anything, I guess maybe more specifically around the timeline. Like I know you said coding is an issue. Like do you have, I guess I'm assuming that you've identified some challenges with how things need to be coded. What are your thoughts on how that might look like in terms of time frame for making those sort of changes?
I believe we can work out the issues of coding existing ML expenditures to the school level, those that are presently coded centrally during the coming fiscal year. So that process can happen in fiscal year 26, and the gap would be 50%, not quite, but close to 50% closed by virtue of that. Reallocating the additional funding based on the growth of ESOL ML population from the prior year to this will also happen in 26. Beyond that, and pending a timeline, it's a matter then of shifting the resources or reallocating the resources from where they are today, so that they're different resources, ML eligible resources in the future, and sort of that's the extended timeline beyond the 3 years, not just for ML, but for the whole thing that we're here looking for today.
And just one follow-up question. When you were talking about multilingual learners and the teachers needed to support that work, I may have misheard. Were you saying that you're exploring opportunities for co-teaching models where you can kind of, okay, are you experiencing a situation where you've budgeted for positions for these people and the positions are not filled, or in terms of we call them English language development teachers, but ESOL teachers, do you have the positions that aren't filled or the positions unbudgeted? Where are you in terms of staffing for providing all the supports that are needed for those learners?
Sure.
All of our, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
go ahead,
Mr.
Mr.
Shaw. No, you go ahead, Nick. That's your area.
All of our ESOL FTE is filled. We have roughly 16 and a half FTE in Carroll County. All those positions are filled. So any expansion beyond that would require additional FTE than what we presently have. And that's what in that resource reallocation that Mr. O'Neill referenced, that's when expanded opportunities could happen when those resources are reallocated.
Except, Mr. Shockney, except today there are some number of our teachers who are dual certified, and that's
And then there's
they're
that too.
exploring
Yes.
as well.
Yeah.
So.
We've kind of gone through our certifications to identify, we have approximately 100 teachers in our system who do have that certification that are not presently ESOL teachers. So there's an opportunity there. We definitely have the workforce to be able to expand and get creative, but that would be part of our next steps.
Thank you.
I think,
Yes, Vice
yes.
Chair Kerwin.
Yeah, I have two questions to wrap up my issues. First, I would like to hear from the APA folks who have begun working with Carroll County. I mean, a major part of this plan is working with APA to realign resources, and I just like to get your thoughts on where you are in the in this process, and your thoughts about the potential for using APA and its expertise to address this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I can start and Michaela can build. I think we're clearly in the really wrapping up the early stages of getting through all the data that's been given to us. And I think we're very encouraged with what we have. Michaela and I were just going through our Slack channel talking about, we're very close to wrapping up a couple pieces of our analysis, which we'll bring back next week to our partners in Carroll County. And I think, like many of the districts we're working with, there's these different kind of buckets of need. I think what the first piece is really figuring out some of the coding and helping us level set really kind of where the county really is in meeting kind of the MSF, because I would say, it's closer than the data that I think you see in the template as has been talked about, right? And that's especially true in multilingual learners, but I think it's also true in even with the compensatory, like there are dollars that will show up in the near future as we kind of think through the recoding. They would show up in that template over the kind of near term. So that's a big piece. And then really trying to think about what is foundation versus what is comp ed versus what is multilingual learners. Like part of what's happened with many districts is trying to kind of build this, it's almost rebuild the plane as you're flying, right? You're not building the plane was already flying, you're kind of rebuilding the plane. And really getting a sense of how do you, in especially some of these higher need schools, really think about how resources have been implemented, right? There is clearly compensatory education happening in tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 schools. Right now, it's not in that template. It's not kind of coded that way, but it is happening. And so one of our really the first goals is just to level set what is, to really make sure we all have an understanding, and we being the APA folks, kind of where the distance is and what's and how we get there more quickly. And so we're encouraged by it. I think what we most encouraged by is that this is a district who has spent a lot of time engaging in the community and really thinking through a larger plan and had the plan and is now trying to understand how best to implement it. And so that's our goal, is to think about where are places it can be improved in the near term and kind of the overall structure.
Thank you. Thank you. My other question is, in a way, is a comment. And Superintendent McCabe, you mentioned that a bedrock principle of the blueprint is that students who need resources will have the resources to be successful. This really comes out of the commission work that the commission I chaired. And what the commission found was that Maryland was not adequately funding students in need. In fact, we were one of the most regressive, have been one of the most regressive in terms of school funding states in the nation. And that is why the blueprint, the commission's report and the blueprint has put such emphasis on getting resources to kids that need them the most. And I'm very struck by something Mr. O'Neill said. He mentioned that the foundation amount of funding exceeds the minimum required. It's the compensatory and the English language learner that is underfunded. So here we have a situation where we are not getting resources to the kids that are in greatest need. That's why this is such a difficult decision for the board, because what's being asked is that we continue to underfund children that are in greatest need of the resources. So I would just like to hear you once again express your commitment and expectation. Should this waiver be granted, what is your level of commitment to see that you achieve the full funding that is expected in the blueprint within the time frame you're asking for the waiver?
Yes, I'm fully committed. As I said in my initial remarks, I am fully committed to the tenets of Blueprint. And I will explain by saying that, you know, Carroll County Public Schools is a place where if I could have already been providing more resources for the students who need them most, I would have been doing that because I believe in it wholeheartedly. What I will say is every school in Carroll County is funded currently with, like, before Blueprint started, we had enough funding to basically run each school at a minimum level. So I didn't have anything to take away from one school and give to another, which is what Blueprint requires. If I were in another system where I had schools that had more resources to take, or if I had more central office staff to reorganize, I would have already done that. What I'm saying is that in order for me to hit the compensatory ed and the ML requirements, I have to severely understaff certain schools in order to do that. And I don't think that's what Blueprint ever intended. And so, yes, I am fully committed to working with APA. I'm fully committed to finding a way to get the resources to the compensatory education students, to the ML students where it's needed. And I need to find a way to do it without stripping certain schools of reading specialists, media specialists, and other supports, mental health specialists for the students who go to those schools.
Okay. And you understand the consequences if you're unable to do this in the time frame of the waiver request. This is a requirement of the blueprint.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Any further question there? I have a question at the end, if that's all, Mrs.
Member Lynch.
Okay.
Hi, yes, I just have another follow-up question because I share Vice Chair Kerwin's sort of concerns or sentiments around making sure that we have the funding going where it is supposed to be going. And prior to the blueprint, we had the Thornton formula, and so that funding went to all of your schools. And so, you know, I would encourage a reframing of we aren't pulling resources away from one school for another school, because the blueprint provided that level of funding and then additional funding year over year over year. It's an increased investment that has been substantial for school districts on a per pupil level. And so each school should still continue to have that foundational funding, that baseline funding that is necessary to operate. And then additionally, these other sort of buckets of funding are supposed to make sure that students who are in the most need are receiving those. You've requested a waiver, and you have given information about your tier 1 and tier 2 schools have the largest growing populations of students, and you have selected to focus first on your tier 3 and your tier 4 schools. And so my question is, in providing some sort of an extension waiver, your largest growing populations of students will now be those, if I'm understanding correctly, who will have to wait the longest to get those resources. And so my question is sort of, what is your plans to make sure that students continue to get the services and the resources that they need to achieve in your time of extension to make all of these shifts?
To sort of clarify those figures, Dr. Lynch, largest or most rapidly growing by percentage, still small whole numbers. So the tier 3 and tier 4 schools in particular, tier 4 schools, by far in a whole number, an FTE count of students is tremendously more students than in the tier 1 and tier 2 schools. As far as the plan, I think Justin just said it better a bit ago than I ever could, which is this conversation about what's in the base school and what presently is. We have compensatory ed kids in those schools and services are being provided to them, but we're not seeing how we can code them as eligible. And he referenced that work. How do we figure out what portion of those services today that we are saying we're not seeing how we can code them as eligible to compensatory ed actually could be, because any change like that reduces the impact overall on those tier 1 and tier 2 schools. Less resources would shift from a tier 1 or tier 2 school proportionate to the amount of existing resources that are proven to qualify for coding to compensatory ed, if that made sense.
Any follow-up?
Can I ask just a follow-up? So are you saying that the services are currently going already to these schools and it's a coding issue?
We are serving students in all of our schools, and in all of our schools there are compensatory ed students, and in most of our schools there are ML students. But using the so-called baby blue book as a guideline and sort of principles of later being audited, the concept of what are you supplementing versus supplanting, that's the kind of conversation we've immediately dug into with APA, and gratefully they raised it at the first sort of follow-up to data meeting. So what we're saying now is, to us, our schools were running at that level of resource before Blueprint said, look at how you're spending your resources. And so the conversation, I'm looking to you for help if you want, Justin. The conversation to start in our tier 1 and tier 2 schools in particular is, what are the resources there now that could legitimately be coded to compensatory ed? Because then those resources are suddenly not part of a discussion of being reallocated. They're already in the right place. But right now we're showing them as sort of foundation resources, if you will.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Any question?
If it's okay to just quickly hop on, I think exactly what we're trying to do is differentiate what is happening in those higher need schools now that is likely in the foundation bucket just being coded. And so it's not just a recoding process just to make the numbers look good. It really is trying to understand what are the types of services that are happening for the students that have been happening, for comp ed students that are differential for those kids that just currently aren't being identified separately. And so we're looking both on the dollar side, but also on the FTE side. So really looking at the different people in the different schools to really get an understanding of what the differentials are right now.
Is the thought then that if I'm hearing, it sounds like it is then predominantly a coding issue that you are concerned about. If that is the case, is compliance expected earlier? Could compliance be expected earlier if you received additional support on like technical assistance on coding or something like that? Is there a way that we could accelerate that process if it's merely a coding and not a resource allocation issue?
And I would suggest it's an and. I think this is getting to the baseline. So this is the we are likely closer than what we are closer than what the template lays out, but we are not. I doubt that there's full compliance, right? So it's getting a better understanding of the delta that needs to happen, which I do think we don't know where that's going to land, right? But it will change the conversation at some level once we have kind of all that kind of baseline laid out.
Yeah, and if I can just add, and Justin just basically said it, I think part of the challenge is without the coding being done, there's not a true baseline for where they're starting. And in order to figure out how you get to where you need to be, you got to know where you're starting from. And so I think it's the first step, and there will still be more things that will need to happen to come into compliance for at least some of the schools.
Okay. All right. Any additional questions?
There
I
are
had-
no
I
other
had a
hands up right now.
question here. Let me again thank Dr. McCade and your staff for the presentation that you made today and for all the work that you've done prior to this time. I'm not sure that I've had a chance to talk to any of you personally in reference to this, but I think that as indicated in a number of questions, there have been a great deal of interest on both sides about getting this and getting it right. And Vice Chair Curran raised a question that I had in the back of my mind because, in essence, this is a partnership. We are, in fact, partners in trying to ensure that we get the resources to the right students, those who need it, at the most opportune time that we can. And we have to trust that that partnership will lead to greater cooperation, additional information that we can accomplish to some degree by ongoing monitoring and a continued dialogue, whatever we decide to do. And with that in mind, many of the letters that I've received in terms of this partnership and the trust and everything else, and as indicated earlier, we received over 1,200 emails. And one along this line caught my attention, Dr. McCabe. It is from a person by the name of Tom Riddle. Let me just briefly state what he stated that gave me a little bit of reassurance on this. Mr. Riddle writes, I am a Carroll County citizen, taxpayer, principal, spouse of a teacher, and a member of the Association of Public Schools Administrators and Supervisors of Carroll County, and MSEA. From all these lenses, I am in support of Dr. McCabe's and her team's work and implementing the blueprint. He goes on to say, as a principal of the Carroll County Career and Technology Center, I've had the privilege of working with students and administrators from all 7 comprehensive schools in Carroll County. While I understand and fully support the goal of the blueprint to provide more resources to underserved student populations, I also know from my work with each high school and within our own building that Carroll County Public Schools is already doing some of that, most of that. Teachers, principals, counselors, and system leaders are working every day to get the right resources to the right students so that all students are making progress, are being given the tools to be college and career ready. He goes on to say, and I'm going to read the entire thing, but he says, the waiver that Dr. McCabe has requested will allow our system the time it needs to make more progress toward physical compliance while not causing the drastic and harmful impacts that we are looking at the system next year. I am confident that our school system leaders will keep focused on our underserved population during this waiver time period. This is precisely the question that Dr. Curran raised. And this is a partnership for which, depending on how we act on this, we are placing a great deal of trust that these things will be done as testified to and confidently stated by Mr. Riddle. That's the question we have. Because we can't hold your hands long enough, we can't monitor you long enough, and we will never have all the resources to do everything that we need to do to ensure on a day-by-day basis all of these things are happening. We know that at the end of a certain period, you must make the accomplishments of 100%. But during that interval, we have to rely upon the words of yourself and people like Tom Riddle to make sure that it's happening along with the oversight that we can provide, which would never be totally adequate to ensure that you're doing this. So I just wanted to reemphasize that point that Dr. Curran made in terms of the trust, the partnership, and what we need to have some assurances that this is going to happen depending upon our decision. I wanted to make reference to that. I don't know Tom Riddle, but the letter that he wrote goes to the heart of my concern and much of what Dr. Curran stated as well. Okay.
Mr. Riddle is a great principal for us, and yes, you have my full commitment.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the staff?
No.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Stated before, let's make sure that everyone fully understand. We will have we will leave the record open until the end of the 21st. Is sometime between that and the 29th, we'll come back with a public session and make a decision in reference to this request. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I think the next item on our agenda, we're going to take a 5-minute recess and we'll come back and pick up item number 5, if that's okay.
Yes.
All right, so what time is it now? It's 2:34 at 2:40. All right, thank you.
Oh, I'm making a drink.
Oh.
Here. We don't have dinner. We don't have dinner.
Can you see me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can
Yes.
see and hear you. You're
Okay,
good.
thank you. Is everyone back?
Yes. We have quorum again.
Okay, I think we're ready to resume our meeting. We're at now item number 5 on our agenda. And we'll go to the legislative wrap-up, and we'll hear from Executive Director and Mrs. Joy Schaefer. Okay.
Thank you. I am gonna, without further ado, turn it over to our Government Relations Director, Joy Schaefer.
Great, thank you. And good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and board members. So we had, as always, a busy legislative session with over 2,600 bills, 879 of which passed. And while some have been signed by the governor already, he has until May 27th to either sign, veto, or allow them to take effect without his signature. Next slide, please. So for the 30,000-foot view of the session, we began with substantial shortfalls in the state's general fund, a structural deficit, which was projected at $2.95 billion at the start of session and grew during session as it progressed to nearly $3.5 billion, proposed legislation that decreased blueprint funding and made substantial changes to implementation, as well as a bill to change the scope of the AIB's authority and place the AIB under the state board's authority. And then we ended session with a structurally balanced FY26 budget, fully funded blueprint formulas, and legislative outcomes that were supportive to implementation, like the extension of funding for career counseling for middle school and high school students, and then no movement on the bill regarding the AIB's authority. Next slide, please. So of those 2,000 plus bills, staff tracked a total of 83, as well as the budget and the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act, which we fondly refer to as the BRFA. Next slide. And you've seen this list of bills before, but I wanted to just include it as a refresher on the bills for which we've submitted letters of information or position testimony, in this case, all in opposition. I do want to thank the board for your responsiveness during the session and weighing in on our position for these bills. Having that flexible subcommittee structure based on subject matter expertise facilitated a really timely generation of these letters and this testimony. I just want to highlight 2 of the bills on which we worked with the state board on joint testimony, one of which was withdrawn. That bill at the top is to alter alter multiple implementation components of the blueprint. And the pre-K bill in the middle of the slide there, which in essence fenced off tier 1 3-year-olds from accessing publicly provided pre-K, allowing them to be served only by public providers. We worked very collaboratively this session with MSDE staff and the state board. So all of these bills on this list either did not make it past their first bill hearing or withdrawn, with the exception of that last bill on the slide for career counseling. And much of the provisions of that bill were folded into the governor's final education bill, which brings us to the next slide, please. More detail of the governor's education bill, Excellence in Maryland Public Schools Act, HB 504, Senate Bill 429. And collaborative time received a lot of attention during session as the adjustments to the implementation changed not just the implementation, but had a far-reaching effect on blueprint formulas. The final result was a 3-year operational pause, but per pupil funding would be provided in the foundation in fiscal year 26. So this serves to sort of bake in the 163 per pupil amount, which will be included in the foundation in FY 27 and 28, which will be increased then, therefore, by the foundation factor, even though there's no per pupil amount in those 2 fiscal years for collaborative time. And then collaborative time year 1 implementation begins in FY 29 with the per pupil amount of $334, which is the original amount legislated for this component. It'll continue on the original legislated schedule of increased amounts through FY 35. I just want to note here that the bill struck the establishment of the Collaborative Time Innovation Demonstration Grants. That bill, and that the bill finally requires MSDE to provide, just in FY 26, technical assistance to LEAs to develop innovative models that can be replicated for teacher collaboration, either at the school or district level. Next slide, please. So some changes to community schools with regards to funding. There was no pause to concentration of poverty grants, or what we know as community school funding. But there was extensive language with regard to allowing the flexibility for school systems to spend a percentage of community school funding centrally on behalf of community schools, including changes to the threshold of the number of eligible schools LEAs must have in order to distribute funds in this way. That went from 40 eligible schools to having either 10 schools or 35% of their schools as eligible schools. And there are now requirements on districts that do this in terms of providing an itemized report to schools on what they spent their money on and how much they spent. And then if they spent things centrally for administration, what that funding covered. And then there's just a couple of governance changes I want to highlight, is the appeals process by which LEAs can request this flexibility in fund distribution. It's no longer a process established by the AIB. The bill shifts that responsibility to MSDE. And if you remember, just last session, the requirement that community schools coordinators submit an annual report or evaluation to both AIB and MSDE, and that those agencies were required to make those publicly available. Now those evaluations are only going to go to MSDE, which has the responsibility of making them publicly available. They'll summarize those and submit that summary report to the AIB and the General Assembly. Next slide. In addition, some other changes to community schools includes expanded wraparound services, which include improving student attendance and chronic absenteeism, as well as offering evidence-based, in-school, in-person tutoring during the school day. It also establishes the Office of Community Schools expanded learning time and gives MSDE the authority to hire staff to support the director of community schools. And in addition to the annual evaluation reporting I talked about in the last slide, MSDE is to conduct a statewide evaluation on community schools on the program by December 1st of 2028 and submit that report to the AIB and the General Assembly. Next slide, please. On the career counseling front, for the Career Counseling for Middle and High School Students program, the pupil allocation, as well as the annual reporting requirement on the part of program partners to the AIB, was extended through FY 2028. The bill requires AIB to report on the program by January 2027 on the effectiveness of the program and detailing whether services provided adequately prepared students for post-CCR pathways. The report requires evaluation of whether students have received high quality career opportunities as a result of the program, and then by that date, the identification of long-term metrics determining the program's effectiveness. Next slide. So with regard to funding for the Consortium for Coordinated Community Supports, originally the funding proposed was a reduced amount of 130 million in FY26, and then every year thereafter to 40 million in FY26 and every fiscal year thereafter. The final bill adopted the amendment made by the Senate, which was 70 million in FY26 and 100 million every fiscal year thereafter. I just want to note that there is 30 million left over from FY25, which can be used in FY26. So that actually provides funding for 100 million in FY26 once that's added. And the Senate noted that it does provide a budget savings of 30 million a year, the 100 million every fiscal year level. And then there are hold harmless provisions for programs for exceptional children funding because the foundation formula flows to that per pupil funding. So in essence, it decouples from the FY27, FY25 pause and community collaborative time funding, the per pupil funding for students at the Maryland School for the Blind, the Maryland School for the Deaf, and the School for Educational Evolution and Development, which is the SEED School. Next slide. And in terms of teacher recruitment, development, and retention, these were very big parts of the bill. I wanted to note that missing from the final bill was the Interstate Teacher Mobility Compact, which was stricken. And then just the next slide, please. So in terms of grow your own, these provisions saw a lot of movement during session in terms of changes to definitions, candidate eligibility and requirements, and they're covered in the slides, but the ones I'll highlight here are, in addition to employment as a non-certified educational support professional or provisional teacher, candidate eligibility is expanded to someone employed in a school-based position. Candidates, in addition to meeting requirements determined by a collaborative, are required to have a high school diploma or equivalent and to pledge a 3-year service obligation. And it also adds provisions specific to collaboratives that implement a registered teacher apprenticeship program model and requires MSDE to prioritize those. And I just want to note with that model, it allows an institution of higher education to provide related instruction through a competitive bidding process. Next slide, please. It established the Academic Excellence Program and Fund, and under the provisions in the bill, counties who want to participate in this program, which provides instructional coaches to teachers, there must be a cooperative agreement between MSDE and the county boards. Coaches and coaching, I guess, is required to focus in FY26 and 27 on literacy instruction. Thereafter, they can expand to other subjects, but are required to pay particular attention to mathematics. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you go back to the last one? I'm sorry. I just want to note that the fund was established for this program, but the interest earned is directed to the Blueprint for Maryland's Future Fund, and it also prohibits transfer of money from the Blueprint fund to the Academic Excellence Fund, or for using Blueprint special funds to support this program. All right, thank you. Next slide. So there are 2 studies called for in the bill specifically. One study conducted by MSDE on the Concentration of Poverty grant program. It requires MSDE to consult with higher education institutions that conduct research regarding community schools and to establish requirements for community school implementation plans. And then the second is a special education program study, which should be conducted by MSDE in consultation with the AIB to contract with an independent entity. And that report is due by December 15th of 2026.
Hey, Joy.
Yes.
What is the purpose of the study? What are they trying to?
So the concentration of
I'm talking
concentration of
about the
poverty grant
special ed
special ed
program.
is special education funding.
In what aspect? Is it adequate, or what's the issue that is being studied?
Adequate, and all the issues related to the adequacy, as well as could there be a tiered level of funding for special
That's
education?
right. Okay, thank you.
Mhm. I just want to note that there is an addition here of procurement for artificial intelligence digital tools. And this came about because there was a joint commission, the Joint Commission on Cyber Technology, IT, and Biotech this summer heard from LEAs, PZAM, MSDE, that there were pilots in place that were getting good reading and math results using tutors run by AI. And please don't ask me to describe what that looks like, because I'm not quite sure. But at any rate, those pilots were grant supported, and no LEA can purchase AI tools of this nature because they're so new, they don't meet requirements in this section of the code. So the timing of the language, the hope is that there will be time to allow for two things: the development of the technology to advance and become more accessible for this use, and then the policy to catch up to the technology.
I just want to, I think this is a really important area. The use of AI assistance for learning at colleges and universities is growing leaps and bounds. So, I mean, this is something that is coming into the education process, and I'm hopeful that Maryland will not be too delayed in getting into this area, because I think it offers a lot of potential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this will allow for the procurement through school year 27-28, and then I'm sure in the meantime they'll be developing policy around that. Next slide. So just a note about appropriations specifically for the AIB. The General Assembly added language to the BRFA requiring the budget bill include appropriations for the AIB without revision. That prevents alteration during the budget process by the General Assembly. Next slide, please.
Could you say a little more about that? That I wasn't aware of.
Yeah, so it's a provision in the BRFA that was added, and there's other agencies and items that are treated in this manner, but so the governor is now required to put the AIBs in the budget bill, and then the language there jointly certified by the Senate president. And it basically prevents alteration by the General Assembly during the normal budget process.
Wow.
All right, Pillar 1. Oh, next slide, sorry. So I just wanted to, we did track some other bills that that did pass, and I wanted to just categorize those by pillar. So with regard to Pillar 1, a bill passed to require MSDB to convene a work group to conduct an analysis of the mixed delivery publicly funded full-day pre-K, as well as a bill expanding a local property tax credit that counties are able to now offer as an incentive to childcare facilities in order to support childcare providers. Next slide, please. In terms of Pillar 2 legislation, the Education Initial Teacher Certification Qualifications Bill passed. This fixes legislation introduced last session, allowing for candidates who've graduated from the nationally accredited teacher education program, which has its own independent portfolio-based assessment of teaching ability, to utilize that and for that to count towards their conditional certification. So an example of this would be Mount St. Mary's, which also has its own portfolio assessment. So their students would be able to use that in order to qualify. Thank you. Next slide. Pillar 3. So we talked about the career counseling program, but the governor's RAISE Act also passed. It's key to the governor's strategy to grow the economy, attract business. And this allows an expansion of apprenticeship to new industries and employers to develop skilled talent, and it provides pathways to registered apprenticeships. The bill establishes the Maryland Office of Registered Apprenticeship Development to promote apprenticeships to business. It establishes the Registered Apprenticeship Qualified Intermediary Program in order to scale registered apprenticeship and provide a bridge between employers, apprentices, and training providers. Ultimately, I think the vision is to have these intermediaries work to create those, what they're calling bridges, to sort of create an infrastructure that will allow facilitated sharing of information and data collection, and just make it much easier to for businesses and industries to pursue or develop registered apprenticeships. The goal of the bill is really to break down the barriers for adopting registered apprenticeship in new industries. Next slide. So Pillar 4, in addition to changes in the governor's education bill to community schools, there's the Public Schools Restorative Practices Schools Comprehensive Plan, HB 197, Senate Bill 68. The bill replaces the term restorative approaches to practices. It basically establishes that MSDE develop a comprehensive plan for the establishment of what is a restorative practice school, provide technical assistance to LEAs if they choose to establish a restorative practice school. I believe it updates some requirements for the schools, school discipline guidelines, which I don't think have been updated in maybe a decade or so. Again, just changes some of the language from restorative practices to approaches. And then the task force to improve attendance and reduce chronic absenteeism, that establishes a task force administrated by MSDE to establish, to evaluate the reasons why there is chronic absenteeism, and to collect data for each LEA, and to improve, make improvements to and suggestions for reducing chronic absenteeism in schools. Next slide, please, on Pillar 5. So just some governance items I wanted to highlight. With regard to community schools, there's a shift in the appeals process, as I mentioned before, for local school systems requesting flexibility in distributing funds from the AIB to one established by MSDE. It also removes the requirement that each community school coordinator submit an application regarding specific outcomes to both the AIB and MSDE, and now that's just to MSDE. It requires a final report by MSDE on or before December 1st to conduct a statewide evaluation of the program and make that report publicly available, and to transmit that report to AIB. And then there is a reporting requirement, again, I mentioned before, for the counseling program, And then budget recommendations from the Senate Education Business Administration Subcommittee and the House Education Economic Development Committee related to the AIB requested reports from the AIB and MSDE on the science of reading and state literacy policy, and then a report on the agency's actions to implement the blueprint by September 1st, 2025. Next slide, please. And so in terms of the state budget, the budget is structurally balanced with a surplus of $5 million, nearly $2.5 billion in cash reserves. About $315 million of that is cash at the end of FY26 and $2.1 billion in the rainy day fund. And the legislature achieved that through a combination of $2 billion in reductions and $1.2 billion in new revenue. The outlook for the long term is very much improved. There's a reduction in the projected shortfall in FY27 from what was $2.9 billion to $155 million, and a reduced projected shortfall in 2030 by 50% from $6 billion to $3 billion. And Blueprint is fully funded until FY28. The General Assembly did include a contingency provision in the BRFA to address potential reduction in federal revenues, stipulating that if federal revenues decreased by $1 billion compared to the FY26 budgeted amount, the Department of Budget and Management is required to submit a report to the Legislative Policy Committee within 90 days certifying that reduction, and that they should outline the impact of the reduced revenues by program and include proposed actions, which would include reductions if they were needed. Next slide. Just a detail here of the budget as it relates to Blueprint funding, which we've covered in previous slides. If you want to go to the next slide, please. There is a downturn provision with regard to federal revenues and the Blueprint. So the legislator provided a downturn in federal revenues, a downturn provision for federal revenues if there's a cumulative reduction in the December general fund estimate and the Blueprint for Maryland's future fund estimate in the December revenue, in the December Board of Revenue Estimates report. That reduction must be at least 3.75% below the March general fund estimate. If that were to happen, per pupil formula increases in major education aid that are required shall be 0%. Any additional funding increases required shall be limited to 0%.
Would that be for the next fiscal year? It wouldn't be, they wouldn't take back money that had already been.
Correct. That's for the next fiscal year.
Next to it, I assume, yeah.
So it would be if the revenues from the March 25 estimate compared to the December 2025 estimates decreased by 3.75% or more, then for fiscal 27, the budget that the governor would submit in January would have zero. Exactly.
Next slide, please. In terms of new revenue, to bring your attention to a few new sources for education funding, as well as the Blueprint Special Fund, I've included here some revenue projection increases in FY26 and the sources of those increases. So 2.3 to the Education Trust Fund from alterations to proceeds from instant ticket lottery machines. That's and specifically those that are at veterans and fraternal organizations. That was a bill by Delegate Ebersole. Projected $5.6 million in Blueprint revenue for an increase of the sports wagering tax from 15% to 20%. And then a one-time $9 million transfer to the Blueprint Maryland Future Fund from the Resilient Maryland Loan Revolving Loan Fund balance. I'm sorry, Revolving Loan Fund. Those last two were both from the BRFA. And then the last slide. And just to sort of briefly go over the follow-up we're doing from session, staff have provided a wrap-up report that's linked in the agenda. It's also on the website. We'll be briefing pillar advisory groups. We'll be following up on issues with partners. We'll be doing some follow-up with MSDE. And we're working on what the interim is going to look like in terms of outreach in the next few months, as well as long-term, and ultimately to prepare for the next session, which begins January 14th, 2026. I don't know if you have anything to add, Rachel.
No, I was just going to say, let's not talk about when the next session begins. No, thank you, Joy. Are there any other questions?
Well, I think we need to acknowledge Joy's very dedicated and successful efforts in the session. Joy, I know how hard you worked on all of it.
It was a total team effort. I had a lot of folks helping me. People would give me heads up about bills I had maybe missed. And so I just really appreciate staff's help with some of the content that we put out also. So really, it's a small but mighty staff.
Very happy to have Joy on the team. Okay, you're on mute, Mr. Chair.
Okay, next item is item number 6, Executive Director Report. Turn it over to the Director, Ms. Heiss.
Thank you. So first we want to provide a recruitment update. As you know, we posted for our positions, our open positions for policy analysts, including 4 positions, including Pillar 1, Early Childhood Education, Pillar 3, around college and career readiness, Pillar 5, a Financial Data Analyst, and then a new position that we've reclassified to support Pillar 5 and governance and accountability. The closing date was on Tuesday, tax day, coincidentally. And we have received a total of 134 complete applications for those positions, which we're very pleased by the response. And we're in the process of reviewing them, and we're moving as quickly as we can to schedule interviews, which I think are beginning next week, so that we can bring additional staff on, hopefully as soon as the end of May. So we will keep you updated, but that is what we are focused on, to make sure that we take advantage of folks who have applied. And I think, in this current environment, folks are applying for lots of different things. We just want to make sure that we are able to make offers as soon as possible for those that we want to make an offer to. Member Robinson.
Thank you, Executive Director Heiss. I was just wondering, with these 4 positions, how close or far are we from full staffing? Assuming these all 4 get filled.
We're very close. We have a couple of shifts. So we have a few. Our deputy director left during session. We have that position to fill, that we're working to fill, as well as the accountability director position that we're working to fill. And then we have a new position for a fiscal administrator. But with those, so we have those 3 remaining positions, which some of that is going to involve internal shifting, which will then open up other positions, but very close to fully staffed. And our intention is to be fully staffed before the end of the fiscal year.
Thank you.
Absolutely. If there aren't any other questions, we'll move on to the finance update. And I would like to ask Alexandra Vernon, our finance director, to provide this update.
Thank you so much, Executive Director Rachel Heiss. Just a few quick finance updates. The fiscal year 2026 operating budget was approved by the General Assembly as submitted by the governor, so there were no changes to our budget. As such, we did not receive additional funding for technical assistance grants. However, we are going to repurpose any allowable remaining operating funds in our current fiscal year to be able to provide some modifications to existing grants and also to allow some additional time to complete the existing project plans with LEAs and the CTE committee. And then our office space update, we had a great kickoff meeting with the Department of General Services Real Estate Office on April 9th and have an in-person meeting scheduled for Tuesday, April 22nd to review floor plan changes and start planning for construction, furniture, equipment, and IT services.
Alex, could you just provide a little what the timeline for occupancy is roughly?
Sure, we're looking around, well, the occupancy really depends on when we'll be able to receive the permitting. So generally speaking, or the last few that were shared by DGS services took approximately 6 months for permitting before they were able to continue or gain occupancy. So we're really hopeful to be in by January, but hopefully it will be a little sooner.
Thank you. I just want to set expectations, but hopefully it will be sooner, but it's out of our control. Thank you. If there are no questions, the outreach and communications update, and Arshia Sethi Snowden, our Director of Outreach and Communications, will provide this update.
Good afternoon, everyone. So a few updates on outreach and communications. We have recently, as of today, posted a new updated progress highlights document, both in the agenda as well as on our website on the resources page. This includes a high-level blueprint overview, which the previous document didn't have, as well as a session summary so that we're able to show what happened this past session and how that impacted the blueprint. We are also working on our LEA implementation progress highlights one-pagers. So these are the documents that show the progress, both quantitative and qualitative, in each LEA. And we're hoping that those will be public in the next few weeks. As far as our AIB updates go, these are our newsletters that go out about a week or two after our meetings, which both highlight what happens in meetings as well as progress that's going on. We have sent out 5 so far, so every month since December when we started, and we continue to get pretty good engagement with them, a higher than average open rate compared to some of our more informational emails, as well as a pretty low unsubscribe rate, and seeing that people are accessing our different resources. These are also posted on our resources page as well, if you ever want to go back and see what we've sent out so far, along with the legislative updates that Joy sent out during session and the summary document that she mentioned earlier. And then as far as our website redesign goes, we are still working diligently on this. We've started being able to build our site, our new site, in SharePoint, and we'll hopefully have some updates and things to show you all soon. And then lastly, just a social update. We are now on Blue Sky, which is a similar social media tool similar to Twitter or X. And we are on Blue Sky as of this past week. So if anyone's listening or you all want to follow us on Blue Sky, it's MD Blueprint AIB, like the rest of our accounts. And we are looking forward to engaging with people there. So those are my updates. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I will just on the first item that Arshia talked about, there is an updated highlights document that includes an overview of the blueprint at the top, and then a little bit of a legislative update at the end that I think might be a very useful resource for members as well as legislators and other stakeholders as they are looking for materials to share to just convey what the blueprint is about and what happened this session. So we will be sharing that also with legislators and others, just so that just to make sure everyone knows it's available.
Could I
Okay.
ask for the Blue Sky handle again? I couldn't find it.
It's MD Blueprint AIB. So similar to our Instagram and Twitter if you follow us there. And I'll make sure that gets put on our website as well.
We
Members
just had a follower added.
Thank you. It's very
welcome.
exciting for me.
Great. Thank you. If there aren't any other questions, then Mr. Chair, I think we are
We're
ready
ready
for
to
announcements.
motion to adjourn and to
Are there
executive.
any? We're just going to adjourn.
Okay.
And
Do we need a statement at this point?
just need a motion to adjourn.
Okay. The motion to adjourn, entertain it at this point in time.
I move we adjourn.
Second. And then a discussion on the motion. Seeing or hearing none. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any objections? Hearing or seeing none, we're adjourned. In 5 minutes, we'll meet in administrative function. Okay. I think the link is at the end of your announcement here for adjournment. So you get it in. Mine is not.